Hello everybody and welcome to Woopercast. This is episode 11 for July the 14th, 2016. As always, I am your host, Joe Yates. So today I thought we'd actually have a bit of fun with this episode, and what I'm going to be doing is counting down the top 10 Pokemon from this season. So I'm going all the way back to last September when the season first started, and we're going to be looking at from there all the way up until now and see what have been the best Pokemon all season. I just like doing countdown lists, and I thought that this would be a bit of fun to sort of reminisce and sort of look back on what was popular, what wasn't, and what was consistently strong throughout the entire year. A few quick things first. I'm not including trainer cards on this. Big reason for this? Well, there's two reasons really. One of them is that there's just so many of them. So a top 10 wouldn't be enough to fit everything on. I'd have to expand it out into like a top 30. And I don't want to waste like 3 hours of your guys' time. So I think it's probably best I keep it to Pokemon. And also, I don't really know where to draw the line on staples. So like, obviously Professor Sycamore, Ultra Ball, VS Seeker, Double Colorless Energy, that kind of stuff. I can't really put that in because, well, it's a given. That's all that's in every deck. So it will be kind of unfair to put that in the list. But at the same time, do I put AZ in the list? That's all play in virtually every deck. Do I put Battle Compressor in the list? That made a huge impact on the meta, but it wasn't played in a good few other decks. Like, decks did really well without playing Battle Compressor. So I think there was too many questions and too much kind of... I don't know, I didn't think I could make a list that was super concise and really covered the whole format if I just went with the trainers too. So I decided just to do Pokemon. It's a bit more colorful this way as well. I get to mention some more fun things. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing this week. I'm going to be going through the top 10 Pokemon of the 2016 season from XY on. So there's quite a lot of Pokemon that I've written down here. I'm going to start off with some honorable mentions. First of all, I'll just list off all the Pokemon that didn't make the honorable mentions, even just random ones that I wrote down and thought, yeah, that's kind of cool. We got Vileplume, Holocha, Bunnelby, Unknown, Rayquaza and Mega Rayquaza, and Entei. And Bronzong as well. Those were all just random ones that I kind of had in my head that were like, yeah, they were good, but they're not going to make the list. Onto the honorable mentions. First one's going to be Zoroark. Yeah, amazingly enough, I couldn't fit this guy in the top 10. Zoroark is a very, very powerful Pokemon. We've seen him thrown into a couple of things, mostly YZG. He's always kind of, since his introduction, it's always just been sort of accepted that he was a strong Pokemon. But I don't think he's made a significant enough impact on the format, and I don't think he's been seen in enough decks across the board to warrant a spot in the top 10, but he's definitely worthy of an honorable mention. Also in the honorable mentions, we have Crobat. Crobat is in here because it was really powerful at the start of the season. Night March has been dominating since probably about a month after the season began, and Crobat was initially seen as this is the big wave helping us deal with Night March. And at the time, yeah, it did work, and we saw it in play in a good few other things. It was an annoying little math fixer that a lot of players had to deal against. We saw it in play with Manectric. We saw it in play with Vespiquen, with a couple of other things, Raichu as well. Probably some other stuff I can't think of off the top of my head. Yeah, it was a really cool card. It did kind of drop off play after a little while, thanks to the introduction of Greninja and Fighting Fury Belt. But it had its moment in the spotlight, and when it did, it was a very, very powerful card. Also in the honorable mentions is going to be Milotic from Primal Clash. This was a really fun one. It was used in Night March mostly to get back double colorless energies before we had Time Puzzle. It was also used in Totina, I believe. A couple of players tried that. I believe that if Time Puzzle didn't come out, this card probably would have made the top 10, because that ability itself is just so really ridiculously powerful. Time Puzzle just kind of outshone it in being more splashable, in not taking up bench space, in not having to start with Feebas. It's on the honorable mentions because I think if Time Puzzle didn't come out, Milotic would still be seeing play in some sort of capacity, and it would still be being considered a good card. And the final honorable mention I have... two more, actually. Next one's going to be Gallade, the Stage 2. We all love this guy. He's on the list because he is inherently powerful. 150 HP non-EX. He brought the whole Maxi engine and Archie engine back into Standard. He saw play at top tables with YZG. Even Night March players sometimes threw this guy in their lists. He was a colorless attacker, countered a good few things at the time when he came in, and he was hard to counter in return. Like, Mega Manectric players really struggled to deal with Gallade because not only did they get one shot by him, but they couldn't actually return the KO. I think some Mega Manectric players turned to things like Flash Energy and Glalie EX to actually have some sort of an answer to this guy. He's only on the honorable mentions though. I didn't think he saw enough play to warrant putting him in the top 10, and he didn't make a huge impact on the format as much as the other cards I have here did. So that's why he's in the honorable mentions. And the final one is going to be Manectric and Mega Manectric EX. You know, both really strong cards. Mega Manectric gave a new lease of life to a lot of cards that otherwise couldn't see play because they didn't have the right energy acceleration. Things like Regice and Articuno, things like Ho-Oh, things like Trevenant EX kind of got to see play at higher tables because now all of a sudden they had a good partner. As for the regular Manectric, he obviously saw play with Crobat, with Seismitoad EX. They popped up here and there. I don't think they were ever... I think they struggled to be top tier for too long. Like the moment they reached top tier, it felt like something came in to counter them and they just sort of went all the way back down. So that's why they're not in the top 10. But they were very strong decks at certain points in the format. So, and hey, it did just win Canadian Nationals. So sometimes it's a good rogue pick, and that's why he was on the list. Now, onto the top 10 itself. This is, first of all, I'm trying to be as objective as possible about this. And I am basing it on stuff that has been good for the long period of time. So you might see some weird things on here, and you might hear some kind of like, things might be lower down than you would expect, things might be higher up than you would expect. But that's really what I was going for with the list. And again, trying to be as objective as possible. So as much as I want things like Seeking from Ancient Origins to be on here, unfortunately, I don't think I have the room for it. And I don't think it made an impact on the format or anything like that. So that's really the aim I was going for with this. There is probably some personal preference in here too, though. So if you do disagree with me, feel free to leave what you think your favorite Pokemon were from this season in the description. Not in the description, in the comment section below. So on to the top 10. And at number 10, Greninja and Greninja Break and Frogadier. Might be a surprise to see this thing so low down, but like I said, it hasn't been in the format for super long. And as soon as it got big, it kind of, like we saw in US Nationals, it dropped off a play significantly. And at the World Championships, I don't see this being a good play either. So that's why it's in the 10th spot. But I think when it did come in and when it was powerful, it was so ridiculously powerful that it has to be on the list somewhere. You know, at times Greninja felt unbeatable to play against. It had such good matchups across the board, and players really did need to go out of their way to actually deal with the card and deal with the deck, because otherwise they would lose, and because it was a top tier threat. It took Nationals by storm over here. It did well at States, I believe. I think it came in at a good time in the format. It came in at a time where it could dominate, and it did force players to be creative and try and find awkward ways to work around it. And at times, you know, it shut some decks completely out of the format. Like Straight Toad, you can no longer play that because it just straight up lost to Frogs. Same goes for Toadina. Those things just went because this deck came in. And at the time, those two were very popular decks and very powerful decks. So I think it's important that Greninja is on the list, but I don't think it deserves to be any higher than the 10th spot. Coming in at number 9, something that just squeezes on here is Giratina EX. Giratina EX is just an inherently powerful card. Like, everything you look at it is really good. It's got high HP, it's got a fantastic attack that is easy to power up despite the weird energy cost. It's got a weakness that literally nobody has played, like, all season. It's got an amazing ability that I think a lot of people even forget about because the rest of it is so good. It's just an overall fantastic card. And there was no way it was never going to be good in the format. So early days, you know, right off the get-go, I think this season, the Arena Cup came in and we saw people playing Toadina, and that's when everyone realized, oh, hey, Tina's really good. And admittedly, yeah, Toadina was really the only deck where Tina saw a huge amount of success. But it did see sort of pop up in a few other rogue decks here and there, like Speed Tina with Reshirems and Max Elixirs and Flareon EX and stuff like that. Popped up in that Trevenant and Mega Manectric deck I was talking about earlier that won Canadian Nationals. You know, Mega Manectric, traditionally not very good against Night March. Now all of a sudden it had an answer to that because of Giratina EX. So yeah, it popped up here and there in a few rogue picks. Even in Wailord, actually, people played this to actually half decent effect just because of the ability. Look, it's just a really strong card. And Toadina was a dominant force in the meta for quite some time, and it was largely down to this card. So it has to be on the list here somewhere, I think. Coming in at number 8 is another card that basically made Totina really good, and that's Hoopa EX. Hoopa just makes any kind of EX deck really good, but it sort of makes decks that otherwise wouldn't be viable suddenly become extremely viable. We're talking, like, look at Waterbox. That came out of nowhere. And without playing that without Hoopa is actually very difficult to do. You really do need that ability, and it is such a strong ability. As far as other support Pokemon go, like, look at Shaman EX. It's super weak. It's only got 110 HP. It's a big target on your board once you put it down. Hoopa, not so much. Hoopa has a massive amount of HP. It's got a weakness which not a lot of decks are hitting for that aren't named Night March. So yeah, no, it's a pretty cool card. It gave a lot of decks like Mega Rayquaza as well used this thing to fantastic effect. Obviously that deck would not be playable without Hoopa. Even so, Totina, like I was just talking about, that needed Hoopa EX as well. Decks that otherwise would have struggled to see play or would have been a lot slower suddenly became much better because of Hoopa. And if any other decks did come up with high counts of EX Pokemon or with Megas in them, you have to play Hoopa. It's just sort of that simple, and that's why it's on the list. Coming in at number 7 is going to be Promo Jirachi. So, Promo Jirachi, God, when did this actually come in? I think it was before the ECC, so it would have been in, like, what, January, February, that kind of time. So we're talking a decent, about 5-6 months ago now. And it has seen play from day one onwards. It actually saw play a bit earlier than day one because some guy in a Swiss regionals actually played it like 2 days before it was legal and never got caught. But that's for another day. But yeah, no, it just saw play all over the place. It gave decks answers to decks they otherwise wouldn't have. You know, even if it didn't outright give you an auto win against something, it could buy you the time to come back in a game against Vespiquen Vileplume, against Night March, against Totina. Special Energy is always going to be such a huge part of the format that Jirachi is just sort of a natural inclusion for those decks that kind of struggle with the decks that do rely on Special Energy. And it only costing one colorless basic energy, you know, you can splash this into literally anything that runs energy, which is everything. So yeah, Jirachi was a fantastic card right from the day one. And not really many counters popped up to it. People started running high counts of Escape Rope, but even then it was still kind of iffy to work around. You know, I think I really liked Jirachi. Everyone scrambled to get this thing the moment it came out because it was only in those small blister packs. And like I was saying a little earlier about frogs coming in and dominating the metagame right off the bat, there's no way I would have been able to do that without Jirachi in its lists. I think initially people tried to build it without the Jirachi, but we saw people even running up to 3 copies of this thing in frogs, and really you just sort of needed to get it going. No, it was a crucial partner for a lot of things. It has not stopped seeing play since its first introduction. Yeah, I think everyone's a fan of this card, and I think it deserves that spot on the list. Coming up at number 6 is going to be Trevenant and Trevenant Break. These have to be high up on the list, and they are. Trevenant, it was kind of a rogue deck, kind of a fringe deck before the Break came out. You know, that ability was super strong, but it didn't really have enough support to keep it going, you know. And then things like Ascension Phantom came out, the Break came out, and all of a sudden it was this completely different deck, and a very dominant deck at that. What I really like about Trevenant is how it's the turn 1 item lock deck that it's consistent with its lock on turn 1, but also you don't lock yourself and you don't have to burn your own resources to get it necessarily. It's a turn 1 item lock deck that can use Team Flare Grunt, Cerasic, Bursting Balloon, all this kind of crazy stuff. And it sort of has, you know, Vespiquen Vileplume can't do that as powerful as that is. Toad can do it, but he doesn't get the lock up turn 1. Trevenant does things that no other deck can do, and that's crazy. It's also basically got no auto-loss matchups. Even dark decks we saw people running weakness policy for, and hey, turn 1 item lock can just beat that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I don't think there's any deck that auto wins Trevenant. It's a deck that was so hard to counter for. As soon as the Break came out, it was like, you know, you can run a deck full of dark Pokemon, you can run a deck with like 4 Hex Maniac and 4 Lizand, but that's really your best bet, and you're still probably not going to guarantee the win against it. No, it's a really difficult deck to play against. It's been a top tier threat since its introduction, and I have no doubt that it'll stay. I'm sure it's going to be a top pick for Worlds, especially now that, you know, we know there's no Karen in the new set. So Night March is going to be everywhere, or at least that's what people expect. And Trevenant is probably one of the best decks you can play against Night March, actually. So no, I think Trevenant's a fantastic deck. And it really affects the way people build their own decks. You have to be super conscious about this. We have 3 item lock decks, technically, in the format. But Trevenant is the most popular one. It took Nationals in Europe by complete storm. It won so many of them. And topped a ton of the other ones too. So no, it has to be on the list. Coming in at number 5. This is where things started to get awkward for me making the list. Especially from Trevenant down, it was like I could kind of rearrange these ones in like any order really, and it would seem sort of viable. But nevertheless, I'll get on with it. So coming in at number 5 is going to be Vespiquen. Vespiquen saw play in a multitude of different ways. People partnered it with Night March. Initially, this didn't really work out. This sort of was more of a thing towards the back end of the season. When people started using it to counter things like Greninja or Seismitoad. It was still a big card in its own right, though. It got play in toolbox decks, most notably in Vespiquen Vileplume. That was its big use, and for quite some time, it just dominated everywhere. It dominated city championships is what I mean. It won a ton of those. A lot of these decks are built around things that beat Night March, and Vespiquen Vileplume is one of them that does it the best. And hey, obviously, you can't do that without the Vespiquen itself. It was just such a splashable card, too, for a bunch of other things. We saw Vespiquen Crobat with Bronzong or Veltal doing really well. It's super early regionals really on in the season, especially over in Europe. It's been sort of good just all season, and that's really why it has to be on here. It's an inherently powerful card. It's a really strong non-EX. It's got free retreat. It's got 2 good attacks. Yes, the first attack is good. It'll save you from a few things. It's never really not been good. And any time like a big Vespiquen deck is sort of ruled out as being a good play, Vespiquen itself will just pop up in another capacity. As soon as Vespiquen Crobat was deemed, not very good, Vespiquen Vileplume comes along. As soon as that was deemed sort of a bit of a risky play, you can play Vespiquen Zoroark or Vespiquen Raichu. Hey, Night March, we need ways to help us out with the Mirror Match. We need ways to help us out with Aquabox, Greninja, Seismitoad. Run Vespiquen in it. It just kept coming up. And again, it's still looking like it's going to be good for Worlds. I could still see people playing this. I think Vespiquen Zoroark might actually be quite a nice pick for Worlds. I should have a deck analysis coming up tomorrow, actually, about a deck that I think could be a cool pick for Worlds, or at least just something, a concept that I have in my head at the moment. And I kind of want to detail that tomorrow, so look out for that. But yeah, Vespiquen's kind of part of that. Not part of the deck analysis I'm doing tomorrow, but it's part of just things that I think will be good for Worlds. So yeah, it's had a whole season of success, so it has to be on the list. And at number 4, I think a few people are going to question this one. I have Baby Yveltal. Baby Yveltal has always been good. Really think about it. Has there ever been a point in the format where Baby Yveltal has not seen play? I'm talking about, I'll include the Fright Night one in this as well, but just the Oblivion Wing one for a start. There's always been things that struggle with this card. First of all, it's 130 HP on a basic non-EX. That's kind of stupid, but yeah, that's just so much. It accelerates energy for 1 basic energy, while taking a one-hit KO against the most popular deck in the format, which is Night March. It's just been consistently good, even against Toadtina and stuff like that. It's still really hard to deal with. The Giratina can't even knock it out in 1 hit, and you're accelerating basic energy to sort of knock that off. So early season, it was good against that deck. The only deck where it really wasn't good against was Manectric, but that never really saw a huge amount of play. At least it never sort of took off to the point where it would prevent someone from playing Baby Yveltals and something. And even just look outside of YZG, where its main use would be. Look at Night March. People actually played this in Night March. Vespiquen. People played it in that. Myself, I played it in that. It was great. People played it in Manectric Crobat, believe it or not. This thing was super splashable. Anything that could afford to run Dark Energy ran this thing because it was just so good. Darkness Blade provided a good answer for Trevenant as well. And then later on we get the Fright Night version as well, which has this fantastic ability. Basically gives people a whole new win condition against decks like Vespiquen Vileplume. It gave people a whole new way to shut off Spirit Links. And as soon as the Fury Belt came in to sort of make things difficult for Night March, Fright Night came in to sort of fix the same problem it had created. So No, Baby Yveltal just sort of kept seeing play. It kept being top tier, and there kept being decks where I was like, you know what, Baby Yveltal is good in this. Baby Yveltal will work in this. So yeah, I think it sounds like it's up really high on the list, but I think it has to be this high just for how splashable it was, and for how dominant it was. Not necessarily dominant, but how it countered the meta, like at every turn the meta took. You know, it never seemed we were at a meta where this card was not good or not playable. So that's why it has to be at that high number on my list. Number 3 is going to be everyone's best friend, Seismitoad EX. Yeah, I mean, when we moved into the standard format back in back into August, I think a lot of people kind of got worried because they thought, oh no, Seismitoad's, Laser and Verbank were gone. And a lot of people kind of thought, right, well, that kills Seismitoad. The opposite was true. This thing can play in so many capacities. We'll start off with Toadtina became big. Became the really big deck to beat right off the bat. Hey look, Seismitoad's an integral part of that deck. As soon as Toadtina stops seeing play, you know what's better than that? Straight Toad. It's just Toad and hammers. And even if you're only doing like 40 damage a turn with Fury Belt, that was still enough. 30 damage if you got an Assault Vest on it or something like that. That was considered a rogue deck. We reached that point in the format where Toadtina was really good. And I was like, you know what beats Toad and some things that partner with Toad? Just Toad on its own. Yeah, that saw play for a little while, and it was a really fun deck actually as well. To play with, not against. It countered a lot of the meta. And then we reached a point where, Greninja comes into play. And all of a sudden, Straight Toad doesn't look like this fantastic play anymore because it has such a terrible time against Greninja. So then Waterbox comes along, and oh look, who's the main attacker? It's going to be Seismitoad. This thing sort of just took so many turns throughout the format, but it always found some way to be good. As the old saying goes, Toad is always the play. I don't think there was any tournament where you could bring Toad to and be worried. Even in a grass-dominated meta, it still found ways to work around things. When going into UK Nationals, it looked like Toad was going to... going into Nationals in general, I mean. It looked like Toad was going to be bad because Water was getting so much hype that grass would sort of... Things like Vespiquen and Mega Sceptile would sort of just come into play as a result. But Waterbox still did really well, everywhere. And Toad was a big reason for that. So no, Toad has to be high on the list. I don't think anyone would argue with that. It's gone now. This will be its last season. I don't think we're getting a reprint of it. But I don't think it's going to leave anyone's memories anytime soon. Coming in at number 2, I think you can guess the top 2 probably. This is the easiest part to guess. Number 2 is going to be Night Marchers. Obviously, I'm not going to do number 4 Lampent, number 3 Pumpkaboo, number 2 Joltik or anything like that. I kind of just had to group them all together into one umbrella. Look, Night March has always been good. I think there was about a month where people didn't really know how to build it, and then all of a sudden they were like, yeah, let's just play it with Militic, 4 roller skates, 4 super scoop ups, go completely nuts. And for that period in time, yeah, it was a very different deck to it is now. Nowadays, the structure of it is a lot less rigid. You can sort of interpret it yourself. I mean, look at Nick Robinson's beautiful list that he won US Nationals with. Oh my god, that list was just sublime. And it looks like a really wacky version of it, because you're not seeing the usual 4 Trainer's Mail or the Target Whistle or anything like that. But that's sort of what Night March just developed into, and that's what these Pokemon sort of allowed you to do. The whole purpose of the deck sort of stayed the same, but how you played it was entirely up to you. The very nature of the cards meant that they were so easy to counter whatever meta they happened to be in. Even in tournaments where I thought, oh, I don't know, I think Night March could be a bit risky here. It still ended up doing really well. It still ended up being really good because, even against your bad matchups, it can always find a way to win. Look, it's been a fantastic and dominating force in the format for so long. It has to be in at least the number 2 spot, bare minimum. And going into the World Championships, no Karen, Special Charge, Ranger. I might do a separate sort of look at this, but I don't know. I mean, it's still going to be obviously the biggest thing to look at for Worlds because of all these factors. I think there's a lot of things you need to consider, though. I think people are going to play Trevenant to beat it. People are going to play Vespiquen Vileplume to beat it. And you're going to need answers to that if you are playing Night March, because you'd be a fool to go there and expect nobody to play a deck that didn't beat Night March. And in fact, the deck I profile tomorrow should beat Night March, so looking forward to that. But yeah, it's got new tools to work with, and as long as I can find the room to incorporate those tools, I think it's going to have a fantastic time. It's just been insane all season. To the point where Pokemon basically have to print a card that just specifically deals with Night March and then not give it to us. Yeah, it's a ridiculous card and it has to be this high. So what the hell could beat it? What could possibly be better than Night March? Yeah, of course. Number one is Shaman EX. There's not really much I can say about this card. It's been in literally every deck, apart from Greninja. Even some early Greninja lists played that, but they were bad. Let's not get onto that. Look, the format is super fast. We can do crazy stuff. Night March can only exist because of Shaman. Looking at all of the decks that have ever topped tournaments or ever been consistent in any way throughout the last year, they have needed Shaman in order to do that. Decks have been built specifically because they kill Shaman and have done well as a result. We base our decks so much on this thing. We base how we build decks so much on this thing. It makes cards like Silent Lab, Garbodor, Wobbuffet good in the first place. It makes cards like Target Whistle good in the first place. It's partly, Night March needs it to function, but also needs it on the opponent's side of the field to race ahead on prizes. It's just been such an integral part of the format that it has to be at the number one spot. I think that's inarguable, quite frankly. So yeah, there you go. That was my top 10 Pokemon of the season. This is the point, actually, in the podcast where I get super nervous. In case I've forgotten anything that's really, really good and it's just somehow slipped my mind on the post-it note I wrote all this down on. But whatever, look, if I did miss anything, let me know and tell me how awful I am, whatever. It was actually quite hard narrowing it all down to just the top 10. Like I said, things like Zoroark that I couldn't fit in, really, and things like Crobat and Zoroark that were just so good for periods of time. It sucks that I couldn't fit those in, but it kind of really shows just how diverse the meta has actually been this season, that I can come up with so many different Pokemon that have actually been really good and very viable at that. From rogue picks to stuff that's just been splashable in a bunch of everything, from the start of the season. There's so much variety here. I think I've really enjoyed playing this season, actually. It's been much better than the year before, 2 years before, when we had Mewtwo Wars everywhere. Or it was just maybe there's 3 decks that dominated. It always felt like there was some kind of outside the box pick that you could make, and I hope my list reflected that. So I actually sat down, right, and I went through all the types that I listed off in my. Hold on, I need to adjust my mic. Something happened to it there. Okay, we're good. I sat down and went through all the types that were in my top 10. Just out of curiosity to see how diverse this format was and how many different types we got going. So, in first place, there were 4 psychic types. That is Pumpkaboo, Lampent, Trevenant, and Hoopa. Then we have 2 water types with Toad and Greninja. Then there is 1 colorless with Shaman, 1 dark with Baby Veltal, 1 grass with Vespiquen, 1 metal with Jirachi, 1 dragon with Giratina. That's a lot of different types for a top 10. And it adds up wrong because I've included Pumpkaboo and Lampent as the same thing. But even if you do sort of group them together, it still goes down to... Oh, and 1 lightning as well because of Joltik. I forgot about that. So yeah, there's a lot of different types here. A lot of different weaknesses we're hitting for. I think that's actually really cool to note, though. So what types were we missing out on? What ones didn't really get a look in? So if we expand this to the honorable mentions, fire and fighting show up. Fighting in the form of Holochit and Gallade, and also really early on in the season, people did play Lucario Crobat, and that was a decent enough deck for a while. Didn't get as much of a big look in as it really should have this season, but there were definitely still some fighting Pokemon that you could play and were very good that just didn't make my top 10. As for Fire, Entei was quite a big deck when it first came out. Not quite as big as Greninja was when that hit initially, but no, Entei itself was a very big deck, especially during the time of the ECC. I think it was mostly an American thing. People in Europe didn't really catch on to it that much. In America, though, it was very big at the time. And that was really the only main fire deck that we saw all season. Flareon EX saw play in 1 or 2 things. Speed Flareon did well at I think an Austrian regionals or something. We saw people put Flareon EX into Speed Tina as well. We're talking a few more niche things here, but Fire did see play in some capacity. There was always just sort of a lot of water in the format that kind of kept it out. And the only type that actually never saw any play, really across the whole season, unless I'm forgetting something, please correct me if I am, Fairy. There was basically no playable Fairy types throughout the whole of 2016. I'm sure a few people played Mega Gardevoir at a few different tournaments, and that's fair enough, but I mean in terms of a big deck that people actually will have to prepare for the meta, or cards that can be splashed into other decks across the board, I don't think anybody had anything Fairy going for them. Off the top of my head, I really can't think of anything. Rainbow Force Xerneas was pretty cool, but it never saw much successful play. Aromatisse, despite being inherently powerful, was sort of, I don't know, well, we lost Max Potion towards the start of the season, and by the time we got it back, things like Max Elixir had just sort of came in at the same time and taken over, and it just sort of was much faster to play it that way. Yeah, no, it's really weird. We didn't see any good Fairy types at all. Again, unless I'm missing something, please correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't know. Hopefully we get that sort of rectified going into the next season, but, you know, for only one type out of, I'm not going to count them all right here, but out of a lot, I think that's pretty good that only one of them was deemed, you know, completely unplayable. So sucks for people who like Fairy types, I guess, but what can you do? So anyway, I thought that was a pretty little interesting analysis and sort of an alternate look at the format that we've played for the last year. I know I did this before Worlds, but whatever. I don't think it's going to change that much going to Worlds. I don't think there's anything that'll happen in Worlds that I can add to my list. And even if it did, unless, I don't know, something completely random like Volcanion wins Worlds, which I can't see that at all. Unless that happens, I don't think there's any other amendments I'd make to the list. You know, if we were including trainers, maybe things like Special Charge could hit that up, but again, like I said, then we're going into something so broad that it's really hard to dissect what was good and what wasn't. But anyway, guys, that is actually going to do it for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back every Thursday, 5 p.m. British Standard Time. Don't forget to check me out on Facebook at facebook.com/Woopercast, soundcloud.com/Woopercast. We're also on Stitcher and TuneIn. And yeah, as always, I've been your host, Joe Yates. Thanks for watching.